At its very core, drug science must remain independent. This means we don't accept sponsorships. It's with the support of the drug science community we're able to do this and make the podcast in the first place. If you're able to become a drug science community member and support the show, you too will be supporting the dissemination of evidence-based drug policies. Without you, none of this would be possible. For anybody interested, there's a link in the show notes. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, David Nutt. Here we're bringing together experts and activists for a rational, honest and informed conversation about drugs.
Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, Jo Neal, and Dr. Hannah Thurger. Today we have a brilliant guest and we have a lot to discuss about psychedelic-assisted therapy, plant medicines, in particular ayahuasca, the mother, indigenous practice, and spiritual and physical healing. And that guest, folks, is Dr. Joe Tafur. Joe is an integrative family physician and curandero, which is a traditional healer or shaman. He is the author, famously, of Fellowship of the River, which is an absolutely fantastic book, listeners. I absolutely loved it. The case studies are absolutely fascinating, and we get to hear Joe's own story. Last year, we did a podcast with Simon Ruffle, who's a British psychiatrist. You'll probably remember that, listeners. He is a student of curandismo, and he works with the Shipibo people. So after the podcast, I asked him to recommend me a book that would really educate me about spiritual practices, and he recommended Fellowship of the River. So I read it, and then I've been recommending it to everybody else. So I cannot recommend it highly enough. But quite a good story about this. My next door neighbor's son is very keen on educating himself about indigenous people and their practices. And he set off for South America about a week ago, and I gave him the book. He absolutely loved it. And he got in touch with Marvin, Joe's agent.
Yes.
And Marvin, he put me in touch with Marvin, and we invited Joe onto the podcast. So thank you very much to Bill. He will be listening.
I was wondering, how this happened. Oh, that's amazing.
Actually, I must stop talking about another story. Is I met a combat veteran recently, a British guy, actually a Welsh guy, who's setting up a charity. And he was on his way to Peru to drink the medicine to start his healing journey from his trauma. And he read your book on the way. And he said he was very scared about doing ayahuasca, but reading your book gave him the courage to do it.
Wow.
He was telling me that today. Okay, so Joe, a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here.
We are so thrilled to have you. So we thought we'd start at the beginning and just ask us if you can tell us where you grew up and why you chose to study medicine.
Yes. I grew up in Arizona in the United States. My parents are Colombian, from Colombia. They immigrated so my father could do his psychiatry specialization in the United States, in Kansas, actually. So I was born in Kansas, in the middle of the country. And then they moved when I was young, about 4 years old, and I grew up in Arizona. I became a doctor, I think, primarily because my dad was a doctor. He was a psychiatrist. And, growing up, I was around him and his colleagues. And I was intrigued. I was into science and biology and service. And so I was interested in pursuing that. And in the United States, you go to university first, get a bachelor's degree, and then apply to medical school later. So there was a little break time there between college and when I decided to go to medical school. There was a period of time when I thought about going to Chinese medicine, and I was very interested in integrative medicine. And so after college studying biology, I took 3 years. I was working and living in California at the time and thought, oh, wow, I took an intro course in Chinese medicine. I was very moved by it and also by acupuncture treatment. I really responded to that personally. So I was interested, thinking about, what's my next move? And then my father was like, well, you have this chance you could get into medical school and you could make more of a difference if you from within the system. He convinced me. to try. And I managed to get into a difficult school. And so the opportunity was sitting there. So I went for it, you know.
I was reading in your book that it didn't kind of work out the way you expected.
Yeah, well, I think maybe I did expect that it was going to kind of go against my nature. And maybe that was my reluctance and my resistance to going down that path earlier. You know, that happened when I was in college. I was observing that track. And it just seemed like, I don't know if I'm quite for that, you know, this certain kind of cutthroat part of it, or I don't know, there was a disconnectedness to it, you know, that I wasn't observing, for instance, in the Chinese medicine program, where it felt more connected. And when I went to medical school at UCSD in San Diego, California, which was a big research university in the United States and a very kind of esteemed medical school, intense environment. And I got depressed there. You know, it was hard on me, on my sensibility. And I hadn't really been depressed quite like that, I think, before. And so it was very concerning to me. You know, started looking for help, assistance. And my father, the psychiatrist, recommended, some antidepressants. It was pretty common in medical school. A lot of people were taking antidepressants. I was like, well, I don't really want to do this, but maybe it'll help me and get me through. And I did it for a little bit, and then I said, I don't really want to keep going. It was helpful. I did find it helpful. But I decided to take a break from that and go into sacred plant medicine ceremony. I had an opportunity in Arizona, where I'm from, to go through peyote ceremony at a place called the Peyote Way Church of God. Peyote is an endangered resource that a lot of the traditional people would prefer that non-indigenous people stay away from peyote, leave it alone. At this particular location, they cultivate their own peyote and have a sustainable production and offer it to like, as they say, all races. So I went there, and I had a really significant healing process in one night, in a ceremonial experience that kind of blew me away. And I said, oh my God, like, how come I never heard about this? I'm in medical school. Why are we not talking about this kind of healing? It's so significant. It really impacted me. And I became very interested in that and pursued that a few more times to get through my medical training. And along the way, being Colombian American and having heard of through family people, not direct family, is not from the jungle or from the Amazon. They're more from the city and from the capital. But there was connections and awareness through a friend of my grandfather's to the Amazon. And I knew about this ayahuasca and the rainforest, the healers, the shamans, as they say. And I became very curious. So, well, if peyote affects me like this, what would ayahuasca do for me? And so I had it lingering in my mind until I finished my training. So that was like, peyote was probably 2000, 2001. I finished my training in family medicine in 2006. So I didn't go to ayahuasca in Peru until 2007. So I thought about it for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And just
I was busy. I was in training, I was busy most of the time.
Yes, absolutely. So busy with medicine. So that was just one night of peyote?
That was just one night of peyote that I had felt such a significant turnaround. So that was it was one night, but it's a ceremonial approach at this place called Peyote Way Church of God, where you go, you have to make contact with them and kind of initiate your process. You go onto their land, which is in a very remote part, desert area, wilderness, and kept in a very sacred way. They've got that setting, spiritually oriented. And then you fast on their land for 24 hours before you enter the ceremony, which is then, in this case, was the next evening. And then it's an all-night thing with the medicine. And yeah, that was where you're doing it alone. You're supervised at a distance, but it's really about your direct connection. In the case of peyote, it's more difficult to get into a problematic, state. It's harder to consume. If you're not experienced, it's hard to take enough that we would be so altered. Yeah. So you vomit and throw up. So going through that process, and one night I was really turned around, it gave me a huge boost to get through my training. Yeah. I went back a few more times. I did over the course of years. Yeah.
That is extraordinary that it has such a profound effect after, the one experience. So then you went to Peru to drink The
In
ayahuasca?
2007, I went to Peru. Colombia, yes, more of my family's from there does. There is ayahuasca, it's called yahe in Colombia.
Mhm.
However, in those times and those areas are kind of hot zones in Colombia with a little more political
Mm.
problems. And so it wasn't necessarily, I didn't have any good contacts there to feel safe to go certain places, although people are going now more and more. However, in Peru, in Iquitos, Peru is a place that's an island where there's no roads there. So it's only by plane or by boat. So it kind of separates it from the rest of what's going on in the region. And it's a tourist friendly area where people have gone for a long time to go to see the Amazon River, or, go to Machu Picchu and then go to Iquitos and see the Amazon. And so some healers from different parts of Peru started congregating there to offer their ayahuasca ceremony to foreigners. And this ayahuasca tourism that developed in Iquitos. And I became aware of a location through Jeremy Narby.
Oh, another great book.
Yeah, Cosmic Serpent.
Yeah.
So in the new book, I talk about how I met Jeremy and that kind of interesting phenomenon.
Oh, I'm looking forward to learning about that. Yeah.
And so then he who had wrote his book and spent time in that region, I said, eventually getting to know him, where might I go to experience this? And he advised me to go to the place where I eventually met Ricardo, my teacher, Shipibo healer. Yeah. And so that was 2007. And I had a major experience, that I talk about in Fellowship of the River, and it became this fascination of, I don't know what that is or what this is, but I know I'm coming back. Mm-hmm. And then where does it go, or what do I do after that, and come back again, and then get to know the healers. Say, well, Joe, if you bring people, you can stay for free. Why don't you bring some people? I speak Spanish. I'm a doctor. They're very interested to talk to me about the cases. And hey, what about this? What about that? So we became friends. And then eventually developing that relationship with Ricardo, he felt ready to start his own place. I said, why don't we start a new place? We can start our own place.
Yeah.
And at that time in my life, it just resonated. It was one of the few times I'm kind of a commitment phobic person, but that I did not. I just said yes. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. So we did that, and now I'm no longer a business partner at Niue Rao, but I'm still connected to it as a co-founder, and I still go. But Ricardo's now the owner as a Shipibo healer, and owns a large healing center, in Peru, where people still come from all over the world, and so the Fellowship of the River was about, as a doctor, sitting there and watching people show up and seeing, wow, how come they're coming down here from England, from United States, where they have access to all this high-tech healthcare, this sophisticated Western knowledge, and yet they're coming here to learn and heal with rainforest healers that don't necessarily, write anything down during the whole process.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you go back to practice as a doctor in the States and then always keep coming back to Peru, to the ayahuasca.
Right.
And why is Western medicine failing us, do you think? Is it failing us?
I think it's failing a lot of areas. There's some areas that are strong, that the Amazonians welcome. Hey, bring it down here. Whether it's the trauma care or, malaria treatment. Turns out the pills are faster than any plant treatment that I'm aware of in the region. Everyone's rapidly willing to take the pills. So there's a lot of areas that Western medicine shines globally. But then we're learning about these blind spots. What is the problem area of the kind of this Western medical approach, and that's what I talk about in the book. And I, basically my opinion from being down there and observing is that we neglect the emotional and spiritual dimensions of health and wellness, and that they're real. And although they're a little bit more vulnerable topics and it can be a little uncomfortable, especially if you're in a very rigid kind of scientific atmosphere where you don't talk about emotional life, your own, for example, then, or that's extremely uncomfortable, then you avoid those topics. And we see that, happening in a very strong way, at least in my experience in the medical system by and large, and just looking for biochemical explanations of everything or material explanations for everything, but denying the reality of what it feels like to be alive.
Yeah.
And so then now you go down to the healers and the Amazon curanderos, and they want to know what you're feeling, and they don't care if it doesn't make sense. You know, they're very interested in approaching it from a very wide kind of perspective, an imaginative perspective, and one in which there exists a spirituality, that there is a resource available to us from the immaterial, side of life that no question is part of the historical medical tradition all over the world, and in Europe, and in England, and in America. In our simple view, I refer to I tell these people this: the Harry Potter years of history was actually where laboratory medicine evolved. This tinkering around with the elements in an alchemical way that Sir Isaac Newton is unquestionably a deeply spiritual human being that, ironically is seen as his departure, when we start measuring everything, breakthroughs in mathematics and whatnot, to be able to study the material world in such a way that somehow his work is used to walk away from the spiritual side of life. And yet his personal journey is one of the most spiritual, that you may encounter. So there's something about that. And there's many reasons, I think, that, we've separation of church and state and whatnot, as we say, but this universal quality of the mystery and its role in our lives.
And do you think we can bring that back into Western medicine?
I do. I think that there is like a growing number, and I think here we are on the Drug Science Podcast. I think psychedelic science and psychedelic medical research is really demonstrating that, what is it that people are finding? One way to describe what people find in these healing processes, whether it's at this clinical research, is they're coming into contact with their hearts and souls and what they find most sacred. And that's really what they're being walked towards. And when you look at the current research that's being published, they're talking about people going through self-love experiences, forgiveness experiences, compassion experiences, gratitude experiences, and increasing their sense of connectedness. So this connectedness scale, I like to bring it up, Rosalind Watson, is a validated measure linked to mental health outcomes. So what is going to bring it back into the society is health and well-being.
Yeah.
So we don't need to argue over who's right and who's wrong and whose belief system we should follow based on whatever attitude. We're following the healing process, and we're understanding biology from following the healing process. And so that's what I talk about in the book. I say, well, as we follow these cases in Fellowship of the River, what can we say about, I say, well, let's hear what the doctor thought would happen. Let's hear what the curandero thought would happen. Yeah. What about the patient? What did they say would happen? Because there's a lot of mysterious phenomenon happening here. And so what is the bridge? How can we tie these things together? And I say, well, one thing I think most people can agree on reviewing these cases, whether they're hardcore, materialists or not, is that there was an emotional healing process that happened. And so that the emotion with its associated biology and physiology exists, I say, at the intersection between biology and spirituality. So our sense of meaning and purpose, which are, I think, pretty secular terms arbitrarily, because those are metaphysical concepts. So first we have to just admit how much metaphysics is like welcome.
Yeah. I've met quite a few combat veterans who've had a psychedelic experience and it has started to help them heal from their trauma. But I'm really struck that many of them will describe it as a spiritual experience, and they're not religious, in the traditional sense.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's a word that is used time and again.
Right. So there's this hunger for that.
Yeah.
So then there's a hunger for that. And so, it used to be within the church and then the religion, and people have their religious trauma, or they don't want to go there, and yet they're from an indigenous perspective here in Arizona, where there's still a lot of indigenous tribes. They say, well, the reality is that the human being has there's a mental, psychological part, there's a physical part, there's an emotional being, and there is a spiritual being. That these are facts that were widely acknowledged and respected by people like Isaac Newton. And yet, we understand the need to be skeptical and careful over the way that, religious thought can dominate or even, subjugate science, and did for centuries, right? And so there was like a big resistance. You can't announce that the Earth is going around the sun, or we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
So these kind of resistances. However, a deeper spiritual practice, like what is the nature of spiritual practice, is, I would say, and this is, the new book is trying to explore this, like how can we examine or talk about or describe a more universal spirituality, recognizing that everybody has this, resistance, but then you see, okay, wow, this healing, how do you heal from, participating or observing the atrocities of war?
Yeah.
Or so many other things, I was with a family friend yesterday. Her son died, at age 50. She's, in her early 80s, and she's describing it's a year down the road. How do you overcome this loss, these, as she called it, these storms of life that we're, that are coming our way? And so the Navajo people here, the Diné tribe, my friend Josie Begay James is an elder there, and she's part of our work that we do. And it's fun to hear her. And she'll say, well, they have the traditional indigenous Diné basket. It's like this, it has this design as it goes around the circle of life, up and down, up and down. So that's life. It's coming your way up and down. And if you think you're going to have a perfect life, you're going to stress yourself out because it's not coming.
I mean, that's
so then how?
So great to hear you talk about that. Yeah, because I think understanding that helps so much.
So they prepare the youth that way.
Yeah,
you tell the children.
I think,
it's a spiritual upbringing. So you tell them, okay, so spiritual meaning, so how do we define the term? Okay, that there's a mysterious side of life, that we are born, that we live, and we will die. And so there's something there, and you came from somewhere and you're going somewhere. Okay, we don't know what that is. It's a mystery. But that this lifespan, that when you lay down to die, you're going to think about what happened during this time, what you got out of it. And so how do we negotiate, work with, deal with, the experience, and still, so sometimes this spiritual perspective that would extend beyond the lifespan, acknowledging that we realize the world does exist before us and after us, is somehow that context is the space and the place that allows people to heal through these deep emotional wounds. That it can't make, why would, people say, why would God create such a thing? Why would we have a world where this exists or where that exists? But from a profoundly spiritual perspective, you hear these people, they find some understanding of what their soul is gaining from having been through such an experience. As terrible as it might be, as horrific as it might be, and we don't wish it on anyone. And yet, as they say here in the tribes, trying to find the medicine in the experience. How can that experience be a source of healing, a source of resiliency, a source of wisdom, a source of compassion that's going to take you higher and further and make you suffer less, ultimately. So there's that journey is like, so then the research that I present in the book is they're looking at, Adela France is an interesting researcher in the United States that I like following her work. And she was following these people who are going through psychedelic therapies and self-reporting and some kind of internet type study, I think it was, but asking them, what the people that it worked for you, what was it that happened, and using all these questionnaires to track their process. Yeah. And really they find that it's a shift in emotional processing.
Okay.
that's what you achieve, So then this emotional dysregulation, emotional regulation, getting triggered, struggling with your sleep, struggling with relationships, struggling with stress. So then working through that stuff, this emotional, we said, well, what was statistically, if they followed everybody that had an improvement in emotional regulation, emotional processing, what was that? What drove that for them? And it was a shift in spiritual well-being. And that's what we keep seeing and we keep hearing about over and over again from the psychedelic research. If we increase the connectedness, we see these emotional breakthroughs. And so sometimes the mystical experience can help people find that. But there's some kind of connectedness. And so then I raise the question, is that connected? Okay, connectedness. Everyone's, connected. I feel connected to what?
Yeah.
So there's something to be connected to. And this is kind of like, and so that's the issue with like this kind of the modern Western perspective or the university perspective versus the Amazonian perspective, this indigenous perspective, which, can be refreshing in so many ways of like, oh yeah, we are connected. Like we're part of this.
Yeah.
We belong here. It's like my Navajo friend, Dene friend says here in Arizona, Daryl Slim says, nature doesn't hate the human beings. Nature loves the humans. Like we're part of it.
Yeah.
We're just not doing our part right now, but we can come back to doing our part.
Yeah.
So how does it happen? I say, according to you, how does it get reintegrated? Well, it's people's health and healing that drives it.
Yeah.
So no matter what you believe, no matter what you tell me from the highest university, from wherever it is, if this Amazonian healer is able to help your child, through some suffering that is bringing you immense suffering, you're going to open your mind to whatever it is they just did, because that's it.
Yeah.
And so it's the health and the healing that's going to shepherd us back towards that.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
You can keep running from it. You can keep saying it doesn't, is that part of your life? You don't want to hear it. You don't want to have it. But okay, here we have in America this crisis of mental health.
Yeah, same in the UK. Crisis, absolute crisis.
So then now we talked a little bit before we got started about the Mamos in Colombia, and so Mamo Lorenzo Izquierdo is from the Arhuaco tribe in Colombia, from the high mountains of Colombia in the north. These are famous little indigenous kind of philosophers that were not contacted by the Spanish until 1919.
Wow.
That because of the remoteness of where they lived, even here across the Americas, that this was one of the groups that was contacted much later, and that they were self-sustaining. I would say maybe we would consider it like kind of in a medieval technology, agricultural, functioning, something like that, something like around those sort of 1400s. In other words, there's intellectual activity, there's all kinds of stuff, there's farming. There's a lot of spiritual discipline within their culture. And so then they talk about, now the next issue is, okay, this disequilibrium in the mental health, arena, which is overwhelming. And then the relationship that has to our relationship to nature.
Yeah.
So then we have the other added factor of the ecological disequilibrium and the danger that also is the threat of like, oh, wow, maybe we're so far out of alignment that it's something really bad is going to happen. So then they said they came down the mountain to start sharing, because things that are happening ecologically up on the mountain where they're from has indicated it's time to start addressing this more broadly with the world. And so one of the simple things that Mamo Lorenzo teaches is that, to heal our relationship with the nature, with the earth, which is this connectedness scale once more. Connectedness scale, the different areas are, okay, are you connected to yourself, to your body, to your emotions? Are you connected to your intimate loved ones? How's that going? Are you connected to your community, to your society, to nature and the ecosystem, and then to the universe and deeper meaning and purpose? How are you in those scales, relating on those levels? So they say that learning how to relate to yourself, to your inner essence, and perhaps also to your inner child, to the innocence within you, that healing that is the most important thing to heal our relationship to nature, that they cannot be distinguished. And so that's their teaching. So they teach So then how do we reintegrate all this? Is like, well, you help people heal their trauma.
Yeah.
And so then by healing the trauma, and this is something I observed a lot in Peru and I talk about a lot, is that you see these people, some of the people who show up from very rigid kind of materialist kind of thinking backgrounds. And they, like you said, okay, this non-religious soldier has a spiritual experience. Yeah. So we had people who are university professors in the medical school in the surgery department. This lady doesn't believe in anything or would prefer it's not even brought up.
Yeah.
So, okay. So then go through a process with the healers and the dieta in Peru and with the shipibos and, that no one's pushing their beliefs on anyone. You're just giving the person the space to express. And as the trauma work starts happening and they start healing, and now their apparatus, their emotional apparatus of their being, of where they feel into the world and where they sense actually their intuition, and where people probably feel a communion with the spirit and the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if that is too clogged up, it's very hard to feel that.
Yeah.
So then the person tends to be more nihilistic. Like, this may be a simple observation. It's just like that. Mm-hmm. The reason they don't feel it is because there's too much accumulated trauma clogging their spiritual apparatus. Mm-hmm. And so I saw that happen over and over again. That when you start working through that stuff, all of a sudden, by the end of the 2 weeks, oh my God, I think I talked to God last night.
Amazing. Absolutely extraordinary. Yeah, I was very struck by quite a few of the case studies in your book. People come to you with significant physical issues that Western medicine has not been able to help with. And through that reconnectedness, you enable those physical, whether it's psoriasis or cough or migraine, that we would immediately assume, oh yeah, we can heal that or we can treat that with Western medicine. But actually it hasn't worked because they've got this deep, deep emotional trauma. And that's what medicine can do.
Right. So then there's this whole field of mind-body medicine. And, we've, again, like the Western doctors know, and they know that, stress, if you could have more flare of psoriasis if you're stressed, like that's accepted, right? The treatment is still the same. Okay, take more creams on your skin, during the stress period. But the idea that the stress is somehow plays a role and a factor, I don't think anyone would deny that.
Yeah.
Or in the case of migraine headache, the person more stressed, they would maybe have more tendency to flare in that area. Or in this case, it was the idiopathic chronic cough. This lady that had this dry cough that had been investigated by all the top pulmonologists, and sorry, we don't know what it is. So now they try to give you something to somehow quiet it. And the other physical case that I brought up in the book was inflammatory bowel disease. This gut issues, digestive issues, everyone kind of knows that stress and emotional dis-ease plays a role, but because how do we treat it is kind of unknown, they just shove it under the rug.
Yeah.
Because you go to the gastroenterologist and, hey, it's a stressful life. Hey, life sucks. That's how they say it here.
Yeah.
They're like, and then that's just like, what? You talk to these Darwacos. Is that what we're trying to achieve here on this earth?
Yeah.
Is that why the culture is like trying to accumulate wisdom and learn from our experience to get to life sucks?
So I know that inflammation's often put out there as this mediator between the life stressors or stressful events and the body responses. What role do you think inflammation plays? How much of it is inflammation? How much of it is that built up trauma, suppressing the spirituality and that lack of connectedness? How do you think those two?
Well, so the inflammation is immune activity, right? So that's really what it is. That when we get inflamed, the immune system is trying to respond to something. That's really what inflammation is, immunologic activation of the system. So you bang your elbow, it swells, and as a doctor, there's the 4 key, it's going to get red, it's going to swell, it's going to be painful, it's going to get hot, meaning the blood vessels are now leaking fluid into the area so the white blood cells can go out and start, combating whatever there is. So it's an immune function. And so then there's a whole research world that I bring up in the book, psychoneuroimmunology, mind-body research. So what do we know about how the psychology affects the way the nerves function and affects the immune function? For example, stress. Does stress affect wound healing? And yes, it does. And so does stress affect your capacity to fight viral illness? i.e., would you be more susceptible to COVID and things like that? Yes, so that those things have been defined and articulated by the research. Stress is still stress. Like that's still, we have this emotional region of like, okay, what are they stressed about? Their marriage, and they're fighting with they're not satisfied with the love they're receiving. Like this smoldering emotional discomfort within them, or there's a trauma that happened to them when they're younger. Maybe it's even subconscious. Yeah. Maybe they're not even aware, but their body is still cycling through some kind of processing that wasn't completed. And so you get into something like a chronic inflammation, you could say, that the body is trying to correct something or fix something, but you're never overcoming that thing. So they call it, allostatic load. I bring up the concept in the book. It's a biological concept of stress, wear, and tear. So you have stress, and then that causes wear and tear on the system. And so then the idea is that the stress initiates some process that, then eventually brings things back to homeostasis. That eventually the elbow the function is kind of restructured and you heal it, and now it's back. Maybe it's not the same as it was, but it's back to good function. So the allostatic load is like, well, what if we keep banging your elbow every day? And so you try to overcome it, and you can't, or maybe it's just too strong of a bang, or maybe there's not enough recovery time in between. And so it starts to deteriorate. It starts to get off of the optimal function of the elbow. So allostatic load starts to lead to this allostasis. You get away from homeostasis to like, okay, now you're not calibrated right anymore. And so now things are not working as well as they could. And so sometimes inflammation lingers, and stays. So could pure emotional burden cause inflammation in the system? So then that's a concept that I brought up in the book, Fellowship with Neurogenic Inflammation. That, in other words, is there evidence measured by laboratory investigation? Yes. That even in the case of Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease, where this inflammation that's being generated in the lining of the gut is so strong that it's making ulcers and holes, and just like the way psoriasis, it'll be so inflamed that it starts to look unwell and doesn't work how it used to work as a skin, as a lining of the gut, that they're just nerves sending messages to the immune cells, and the lining is enough that if there's a disequilibrium in the system, that would generate that. And so then how do we heal that? If somebody was able to calm their holistic system, their psychoneuroimmunology, heal it, could that shift? And then we observed cases where it does. But it doesn't, back to the Shipibo perspective, like it never has to get away from the emotional side. It never has to get away from the spiritual side just because there's inflammation. Yeah. They're saying it's all interconnected. Yeah. And all the way down to, then you had asked me about a little bit was the epigenetics and this idea. There was an idea that in my world was from ayahuasca visions telling me, Joe, this lady with the migraine, her problem isn't in her genes, it's on her genes.
Yeah. Could you explain?
So this is conditioned.
Yeah, so just to explain to our listeners, I mean, I'm ashamed to admit I should know more about epigenetics as a biochemist by training originally. Some people might not know what epigenetics is. It's still relatively modern in terms of a concept.
Yes.
But it's super fascinating and sometimes a bit of a buzzword at the moment, even on Instagram. But yeah, I think people just a brief description and kind of
brief description,
and then how you came to it in your vision.
Right. So I think Bruce Lipton, he's a researcher he's a writer that talks about this, and I think it's interesting to hear how he talks about it. So this idea that you have the genes, like this hardwired blueprint of my genes, I can't change my genes, stuck with my genes, and then there's the expression of those genes. And those genes are expressed in many different ways. And we know that, like, the simplest example to kind of imagine is that the same DNA is in the cell that is on my skin, that's in the cell that's, in my eyeball. And so it's being expressed differently in different places, the genes. And there's a programming that is part of that expression. And so he talks about it like, okay, what if the blueprint was the DNA code, and then there's the contractor that reads the blueprint and then can express that in different ways. And so there's that, we didn't, this is a modern idea because we didn't know how this might happen, but now the biology is being explained how this would happen, that you could have conditioning of the system, the nature versus nurture. So could you have a problem that looks like genetic because it seems so ingrained in the biology of the person, but is actually epigenetic, that it could be deconditioned? A simple example is something like, and I don't know if this is the perfect example, but something like diabetes type 2.
It's metabolism often gets brought up as sometimes can be genetic. Obviously,
so diabetes type 2, right? So that the person, because of the way they're eating, that they would push their body into this insulin resistance and get diabetes type 2. And then they say, oh, but then the kids get it. Oh, well, my dad had it. Or, and then the kids are getting it younger. They're getting it younger than their parents had it. And you realize that it's an environmental issue that's affecting genetic expression, that's making it look like a biological disease, but it could be reversed. It could be deconditioned in many cases by changing the diet, changing the lifestyle. So it's this idea of the conditioned, system. So then in the case of emotional trauma, that the system also tracks heavy trauma, that it's normal that there are experiences that are gratifying and the system wants to remember and know, oh, that was really good, or that was really delicious, or that was good for my health, or things that, whoa, that was very dangerous. Never, ever forget that. Mark it in the system. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it's almost like some degree of biological instinct is related to this, that there could be things locked into the system. So there's a lot of evidence for epigenetic changes related to childhood trauma.
Yeah.
That there's windows of development during the emotional attachment, right? Where it's like, okay, you're attaching to your caregivers, and that window when you're learning as a young primate how to relate to other people and to yourself. And so you're recording and you're learning, and that's getting programmed into the system in a way that would then close up and say, okay, you're done learning languages for now. You can learn it. It's going to be more difficult. But, this time you could learn it without even thinking. You could learn about relationships and love and just by being, and that starts to get ingrained into the system. And that would stabilize. And so epigenetics is a place where some of that kind of thing could stabilize, even heavy trauma later in life. Mm-hmm. And so then the question is, war trauma later in life, does it lead to epigenetic shifts? And they have demonstrated in some cases, yes. Yeah. Can that even be passed on to the next? Yes. And so the ancestral trauma research, Rachel Yehuda and their group in the United States studying, World War II, the survivors of the Holocaust, that moved to New York and are living there, and their descendants are having higher prevalence of anxiety and depression. And they have evidence from the epigenetics that this is from the trauma that they experienced during the war. Mm-hmm. Their parents, their grandparents. It's been conserved within the system as a form of instinct to never ever forget that such a thing, that kind of energy is something to watch out for. But this is the allostasis. So now we've calibrated ourselves to such a trauma, such an extreme event that's not really adaptive. It doesn't help our function to prepare physically for the Holocaust, from a biological level, that our immune systems are trying to prepare, that our brain function is waiting for that to happen. There's a point at which that becomes dysfunctional and problematic and reduces the resiliency within the system, reduces the healing capacity within the system. So then we say, okay, we got to decondition that past so we can come back to present function to regain resiliency, to regain the full capacity of our apparatus. So that's the idea.
So how do we reverse that or restore?
Yeah, well, So then one of the thoughts is spiritual practice, just to throw it out there. So meditation has been shown to reverse, some epigenetic changes. One, psychotherapy to a degree, can do it a lot. Antidepressants have shown to impact, the system at that level. The next area that's interesting and it hasn't, we'd explored it through our research study. So we said, what about, the ayahuasca said epigenetics? Here's where you guys should focus your attention. I think Simon Ruffle, he's focused there. And the thing is, it's not so easy to study. It's a modern thing. And it's very talking about molecular changes and noise amidst incredible amount of variables, especially in the study site he's thinking about in the jungle. And so when I had the idea, I thought we were trying to do the same thing. Oh my God, let's study epigenetic change. We're seeing these transformative healings that look biological. Where would we find evidence? Where does the spirit touch the flesh? Mm-hmm. That was the question. And so we said, well, the epigenetics, is a very funny little super sensitive element of the biochemical system that does respond to parental love and a lack of love, that does respond to meditation in altered states of consciousness. So it was like, is this an area of that's what in Fellowship of the River I explored, and that's what ayahuasca was trying to tell me, that this is a very sensitive kind of funny little area to look at the biology of where does it respond to spiritual healing? Is that possible? Mm-hmm. Could that be possible? So then you have this added, it's related somehow. We're still learning about how it might be related. Is this increase in neuroplasticity, right? So you see that is being demonstrated with the psychedelic research that, okay, so now this critical window, Goldolin is somebody you should get on the podcast.
Oh, we've had her on. We've had her on.
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely wonderful work.
Right? So cool. And so this idea of okay, we're reopening this neuroplastic capacity so that the psychedelics give us that advantage of this is really ingrained, this is really entrenched. How does that relate to the epigenetics? We're still not sure. She's not as interested in that as we were. She's looking at other aspects of how it reorganizes. Yeah. I was, because I was like, could that be where this is happening, that it's being received, that the energies are somehow being reorganized at the immaterial level, that there is a physical capacity and there's a biochemistry, but when does it change? And so we said, that's too many variables in the jungle. We don't have a refrigerator. I can't make sure. I'm not convinced these guys are going to write it down when I'm not here. Yeah. So we did with MAPS. We asked MAPS and the MDMA research study that they're doing with PTSD. Could we piggyback and take saliva samples and try to see if this transformative healing that's happening with PTSD there and the MAPS MDMA trial, would it lead to epigenetic change? Would we see, if we looked at certain regions that are known to be impacted by trauma, the cortisol receptor and associated genes in that area that are known to be impacted by trauma, emotional trauma, war trauma, sexual trauma, could we see a change in those areas in the people that were responding clinically? And so we did that research study, and it was saliva samples, and it was impacted by COVID. And so all of a sudden we couldn't do the saliva. So we had a very small number of people, 21 or 20, something like that, 22. So they, we're never going to find anything with 20 people. And then, then that MAP study's over. It's like, okay, it's over. You're trying to catch it while it's passing. And we missed it. And we got some. With the little bit that we got, we published, and there was something found. Wow. And so it was, yes. So we were able to find, it's a pilot study. I'll give you the link here when we're done, that said, yes, there were clinically relevant changes. The thing that we found that I was very interested in is that it wasn't, one of the things that they focus on with this epigenetics, trying to find is these little markers of methylation, these methyl groups that get tagged onto the DNA strand. And from a very kind of, I think, overly simplistic model, although I'm sure it plays a role, the focus is, okay, everything up methylated or down methylated. So I was like, well, I don't know if it's as simple as that. Because one of the studies they did with mice was showing that they could have an epigenetically marked trauma from a smell, that was somehow coded into their DNA. and that could be passed on to several generations. That the smell.
Amazing.
And so how does that just go up or down? Having been around biochemistry and biology and been living in the Amazon and living as a human being, it's pretty much impossible for me to accept that it's that simple.
Yeah.
And then here we are on the internet where they are using binary ones and zeros, but it turns out you just really mix and match them and you can do a lot of magical things with just up and down. So then we saw that the people that healed were, or that demonstrated healing were the biggest change.
Yeah.
They weren't just up and they weren't just down. Some of them went up and some of them went down.
Oh.
So to me, it's like I would imagine, and this isn't proven, these are just theories. You have this allostasis where they're off calibrated and you bring them back. And because it's so different for everybody, it's a different process. But the ones that changed the most, they went from here to there. Those are the ones that we saw had the epigenetic shift or the methylation shift, at least temporarily. We have to follow it out. And they also had an improvement in their PTSD.
I mean, the improvements in PTSD were extraordinary.
They're extraordinary.
Yeah.
They're extraordinary. And that's the kind of thing that you're seeing once in a while, like I said, with these combat veterans.
Yeah.
So then it's this spiritual, or at least wide open emotional context that's allowing them to figure out how, at a heartfelt level, they might forgive themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a friend who's been with the mammoths, just to go back to them. So they can do this kind of thing without plant medicine?
Sure. Just like Isaac Newton, So it turns out that we hear about it all the time, the gurus and the meditators and all kinds of spiritual healings and miracles from the saints and all the rest of it, right? So we do hear about this throughout history, that this spiritual connectedness would have the potential to influence physiology. So meditation, is a big mindfulness research, is a huge area where they focus on this, showing how the physiology responds to this. So you could make the argument that, okay, well, they're just being still, and so their blood pressure is coming down, and their heart rate and their inflammation is responding to that. But then the advanced mystics, they're saying, no, we're connecting to an energy.
Yeah. They're
saying, actually, the problem is you're not allowing yourself to be nourished, by the prana or by the chi or by, the connectedness, the interconnectedness of all things. So the Mamo says, yes, there's something to connect into. There's something to consult with that they try to guide themselves from. And so they have different ways of getting further along with that. And one of I did the 9-day sit with one of them, with Mama Lorenzo, which is a lot of meditation. It's something along the lines of Vipassana. Here in the United States, there's a lot of Vipassana retreats, 10-day meditation retreats where people are in stillness for an extended period of time. The Mamos bring another element, at least the one I went to, where they do a lot of energy work. You're encouraged to do a lot of energy work during the meditation. So an example was, meet me tomorrow at 6 a.m. You guys better be there tomorrow at 6 a.m. Be there at dawn. You're going to be sitting on your little stool outside, staring at the forest. And all right, you better be there. You get there at 6, sit there. He shows up at 9.
Oh.
So you've been sitting there for 3 hours, just trying to be a good boy. And you do it. And then he says, oh, okay. No comment about showing up late, nothing. Just, okay, now I want you to remember the first time that you ever felt anger. Can you remember the first time you ever felt anger? Can you remember the first time you ever felt betrayed? Or what was the first upsetting thing can you go back and remember that? And then, as you remember that, maybe you're gonna go through this energetic process to release that and to try to deal with that in a relationship with nature and a relationship with spirit. And then you're gonna see what comes up after that, and just keep following that down. And okay, I'll be back, in a little while. Come back at 12:30. Are you finished? Did you finish? How's it going? So this idea of just doing this energetic kind of spiritual work over this extended period of time and digging up And I think at the end of the 9 days, you remember things that you had forgotten.
Huh?
You get in touch with memories, and the hope is to get in touch with this inner essence. Your childhood, that part of you that's more connected to the spirit. The way the children arrive, shiny, happy, enjoying in awe of everything going on around them. We were that, all of us were that. And so like somehow bringing yourself back into continuum with that and going through this extended period. So the mammals, there's different, you hear different legends of the mammals where that the particular tribe, this tribe, that they pick that person, that they pair the parents because they've done everything, they'll say, okay, today I want you to think about when your parents came together, everything they didn't do to prepare themselves spiritually to conceive.
Ah.
So now you're going to go ahead and make offerings for everything that they may not have done to prepare themselves spiritually to conceive. And that once you address all this stuff, then you're going to bring your conception into order, into alignment.
Gosh.
And now from everything through the gestation, now everything from your birth to the first menstruation for the girl, for the female, for the one with the uterus. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the male, the biological male, until their first ejaculation. Now you're going to go through everything that they could have done or should have done or would have to put things into a more spiritually conscious way of doing it. So they say that the mammal, the ideal one of the tribes, this is like a legend, I don't know if this exists or doesn't exist, that they choose the two parents, that they've been prepared the right way or in the spiritual consciousness.
Gosh.
Virgins that conceive, that now the child is going to be raised to be mammal, that one of the tribes, the legend, is that they would take the child into a cave.
I have read that actually. Yeah.
Raise them in the dark for years.
Yeah.
So that they, develop their spiritual sight more strongly. And then by the time they're actually exposed to light, now they're in a different preparation.
Yeah.
So things like that. So, no psychedelics, but 7 years in a cave, is more extreme. Yeah. So a lot of meditation, a lot of energy work, a lot of connection with nature, a lot of ritual, a lot of offerings. They feel like it's so much has to do with, or my exposure to them is just no reciprocity, like giving thanks for everything that we as participants in this earth, that we have to give offerings and give thanks for everything that, my podcast is going well. Okay. When was the last time you went and gave thanks, which we do see that in the Christian Catholic, my mom is like that.
Yes.
My mom is Colombian. And so then I say, Fellowship of the River. Successful book. It's like, okay, great. It's wow. I can't believe it. It's working. Says, that's nice that you wrote a book and everything. But, when was the last time you thank God to give you enough intelligence, to put these ideas together? That's what you should do. And so the mama says the same.
Yeah.
That you should be spending more time in the gratitude and giving thanks.
Yeah.
And that not only does it help you appreciate things, but the idea is that it puts you more into connection. And now it's easier to receive more wisdom, more guidance.
Yeah, and I think it's a belief now that's actually shared amongst kind of like a bit more popular psychology, I guess you could call it, like the importance of gratitude. So that's
gratitude journals.
Yeah, gratitude journals, and but it's a lovely analogy to have.
Gratitude journals just are used in psychoneuroimmunology research. Just in bringing down inflammatory markers with gratitude journals is a published phenomenon.
It's published.
Yes.
And it's amazing what it can do. Again, I guess it shows you the power of your mind. So if giving thanks then to your book, what about giving thanks to your new book that you've written? Which is the perfect segue.
Yes. The new book is The Medicine Song, and it's a subtitle. So it's called Medicine Song. Subtitle: Spiritual Healing and the Psychedelic Renaissance. So it's me. The last book the forward was Gabor Mate. That was a great forward. Now I have Scott Shannon, is a psychiatrist, integrative psychiatrist here in the United States, who's one of the MDMA trial doctors running one of the study sites. He also runs a lot of ketamine training and treatment, and also now in Colorado, where they have legalized psilocybin mushrooms, they also have interventions with psilocybin mushrooms and take people down to Mexico to the Mazatec healers that have this ancestral wisdom of working with the mushrooms in healing ceremony, spiritual healing ceremony. So the book is about stories. It's supposed to be more stories. And the stories are from my own life this time, not so much case reports. I try to pick stories of when spirituality was more mystical experiences or strange phenomena. It was too strong for me to ignore.
Okay. Oh.
And so I go through 30 years.
Wow.
Of that and they're not, it's 12 chapters. But I pick out stories that happened when I was when I was a teenager that I had a near-death experience. I was thrown out of a rolling car.
Oh.
And so that near-death experience. And then when I went to medical school and then had an experience with a supernatural connection with a patient who had been through a related trauma. And that was it really impacted me. Oh my God, that was real.
Gosh.
That was so strange, but that was real. That just happened.
Yeah.
And then later being frustrated as a doctor in internship in the hospital and a patient that was stuck in kind of coma that had been saved. The life had been saved by the doctors, but there was nothing more to be offered because we didn't have anything more to offer. And then sneaking an energy healer in to work on them in the intensive care unit and seeing, remarkable response that you could explain it away. But hey, for me, I was changed after I watched that happen. And so then following that down into the fellowship of the river years of, just saying, okay, well, then I went to Peru and that's another book. And then after that, coming back to America and starting to pursue getting religious protection for ayahuasca ceremony for our community here in Arizona. And then getting involved with ketamine work and seeing some very strange things happen there. And then going back to Peru, to Chavin, a temple where it's been known for thousands of years that they take San Pedro cactus with the temple and a spiritual practice and going through that and more, so it's following those 30 years of my spiritual kind of journey, but mapping that onto the psychedelic renaissance. It's saying from 1990 to the 2020s is this time.
Yeah.
And then mapping that on to this prophecy of the eagle and the condor from the Native American communities here across the Americas. It's a lot of different versions that we're in this time period that was recognized that, this is going to be a very significant astrological time. Okay. And there's a version of it that's a Peruvian version from the Inca and the pre-Inca that claimed that there's these Pachacuti, that there's these times of major shift and change, and that the last one that they had anticipated was in the 1490s to the 1520s.
Gosh.
And they said that would be this time when, according to this, that the eagle culture that they imagine, this Western culture from their perspective in the mountains of Peru, would meet the condor culture. And they're from the Condor Mountains there, the big Andean condor.
Wow.
That their culture would be more focused on spirituality and community and nature and, honoring the divine feminine. And then this eagle culture, which there's the Western culture, what they receive, the Spanish conquistadors, would be this more materialist focused culture, more technologically focused, more disconnected from spirit, more patriarchal. And that there would be 500 years where the eagle would dominate the condor. And there would be these tragedies, across the Americas, at least as an example of the colonization in the Americas, as an example.
Yeah.
And then in the 1990s, 500 years later, there would be another Pachacuti from the 1990s to the 2020s. And they said, then what's going to bring the change? They said, well, the eagle people, the eagle culture, the eagle path, the path of the mind would begin to see the limits of what it can do. And would begin to humble its arrogance. It would be humbled.
Yeah.
And so in its humility, it would start to ask for help from the Condor people. The Condor people, still grieving their losses, and in many cases deeply resentful and very reluctant to share, seeing the state of the world, which was to be, according to the prophecy, in widespread disequilibrium within and without. Mental health crises and ecological.
Yeah.
danger, that they would say, well, we're going to need to open our hearts again. The path of the heart, despite so much heartbreak, would have to open again to new levels of compassion and forgiveness in order to find a way forward. And so then this is the same period of time when the ayahuasca, for example, and a lot of the iboga and the mushrooms start entering, and a lot more sharing across cultures, here in the Americas in particular. And so ayahuasca making its way into United States, and these different things that happen, and court cases here that legitimize that spiritual practice, and that we participated in that, right? I have the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, and we went through a lawsuit against the federal government, and we won a settlement. We got a settlement 2 years ago, or last year. And so now I have DEA exemption to offer ayahuasca ceremony in the United States.
Gosh.
And so our spiritual community is called the Church of the Eagle and the Condor.
Uh-huh.
And so the end of the book is, receiving the exemption.
And actually hugely optimistic then for the future.
Well, I mean, the optimism is around what we can do. So that is, the end of the book is, how do I got to write, this is a proof. It's not ready yet. We're still going through it. But the last sentence, which was in part shaped by the editor, just finish it, says, judging by the interest in psychedelics and plant spirit medicine retreats, it is clear that there is a hunger to integrate spirit into our daily lives.
Yeah.
We humans are looking for spaces and places where legitimate spiritual healing can take place, where people can be safely cared for in their delicate vulnerability, cared for without judgment. Together, if we can create more spaces like that, we will have the opportunity to connect, to experience our interdependence and thrive.
Oh.
So the hope is that we do that.
Yeah, and we do it well.
If we do it well, we have to do it well, right?
Yeah.
That's it, right? In general.
Do you know, Joe, that's absolutely wonderful. I think we have sadly run out of time. We've run over a little bit, but we could talk to you all night.
I can't wait to read the book. That is a beautiful, beautiful ending.
Yeah, and it is optimistic, and looking at the news, and the world doesn't feel particularly optimistic at the moment, the mental health crisis, but that's a fantastic, optimistic, forward-looking way to finish.
Even if everything goes straight to hell, there's still going to have to be some legacy for the survivors. There's some wisdom we still want to pass on to someone.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that this trauma-informed healing is pretty much what we need in order to get people to raise their sensibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I think that's a great message to finish on, actually. So thank you so much, Joe. This has been really enlightening. Really, really enjoyed it. I loved Fellowship of the River, as I've said, and I'm really, really looking forward to the next book. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you both.